The first keynote address on climate crisis and the challenge for humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Vidhura Ralapanawe, Executive Vice President of EPIC Group, for this presentation. With a round of applause, please welcome Dr. Vidhura Ralapanawe.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So, slight change in the topic. Instead of talking about climate crisis, I'm talking about climate breakdown. As we speak about climate change, when I first started talking about climate change in the apparel industry was around 2006, where I just come back from working as a climate researcher and entering into the apparel industry. And throughout that period, the way we described climate changed. We moved from climate change to climate crisis to climate emergency. And 2023 was a bit of a unique year, so that we changed the name again to climate breakdown, and I'll explain to you why. But first, let's think about what's the problem. The problem is that if you look at our history of 800,000 years, the carbon dioxide emissions or carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere has skyrocketed in the last 100-odd years. And this has created a situation, we used to call it global warming, and then we used to call it global heating, and now even the UN Secretary General talks about it as global boiling. And this carbon dioxide is what drives the temperature increase, both in the atmosphere as well as in the ocean, and changes our climate in a very dramatic way. And we can see this in the 10 warmest years in record, that's spanning 150 years. Actually, 9 out of the last 10 years come into this set of 10 years. And we can clearly see in the last 150 years how the temperature has moved from kind of average level that we were used to a level that is currently about 1.2 degrees over pre-industrial stages. And it reflects in different ways. So this picture is actually, I think it's 2022, when the spring rains covered about 1/3 of Bangladesh went underwater. So we had earlier speakers talking about how much vulnerable Bangladesh is for climate crisis. And part of the problem is actually the global sea level rise that is happening and which we are expecting to grow at an exponential rate. We saw the same thing last year in the late fall, where about 2/3 of Pakistan got flooded through unusual monsoon rains. This is 2020 when the forest fires in California essentially covered the Golden Gate Bridge in smoke and fire, so that it looked almost like an apocalyptic image. But 2023 was unique. Now, I used to be a climate researcher, so I keep checking what's happening. And the kind of temperature records that we saw in 2023 was completely unprecedented. Here you can see what we saw in the early summer. And this is what we are seeing in the fall. Now, what's interesting in the first two pictures is that in the southern hemisphere, it's still not summer. And still we are seeing temperatures 30s, 40s, and this is not normal. We saw an extremely early start of Canadian wildfire season, where by May, more forests have burned than a typical forest fire season would last. And this became a bit of an interesting global situation rather than something that got restricted to Canada, because in the bottom picture you can see how the smoke from Canadian wildfires traveled all the way across Atlantic Ocean towards Europe. And these are, again, very strange pictures, because this is how New York City looked like when the smoke came from Canada downwards, and even all the way down to Washington and southern United States. What we saw that was also very unique this year was what was happening into the ocean temperature. Now, the two pictures that you can see, especially the bottom right-hand one, where we saw this sudden spike of sea surface temperature, especially in the Mediterranean and around Europe, 3 to 4 degrees over normal. This kind of condition is extremely rare, and you don't expect that. Now, this shows some technical stuff, but I'll tell you, what we are seeing in sea surface temperature is something that scientists did not expect to happen around this period. When I was studying about climate change, we were always thinking about these type of changes happening in 2035, 2040, 2050. And this is what our conversations around Paris Agreement was built in. We understood the climate system to work in a particular way so that our emission reduction strategies can keep our climate stable. The whole of human civilization developed during a period of what we call climate stability. It is already gone. And this is the start. So whatever you think about what's happening in 2023, we will think that 2024, that 2023 was better. This is a Category 5 Typhoon Saola, which hit China. This is the cyclone that hit Florida. What's unique about it? It moved from a Category 1 cyclone to Category 5 cyclone. The intensification happened in 24 hours. Why? What caused it? Because extreme sea surface temperature around Florida. We are talking about now a Category 6 hurricane as a possibility. Now, what's unique about Category 6 hurricane? There is no human infrastructure that can survive a Category 6 hurricane. But we don't need Category 6 hurricane. This is what happened to the floods, happened during floods in Libya, where over 15,000 people died. Why is this happening? Because increased temperature creates more humidity in air. So when even a regular rainfall, it comes much more, you get more rainfall happening. So we are seeing in China about 450 millimeters of rainfall happening within 24 hours. And there is no possible way that you can design infrastructure for that level of rain. This is something that caught scientists completely unaware, this rapid decline of our Antarctic sea ice that happened in 2023. Now, all of this is leading to the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges that Bangladesh has, which is sea level rise, because this is a low-lying river delta. So this is one of the glaciers of Greenland, and you can see how the mouth of the glacier has disappeared over a period of roughly 7 years. This is what normally most glaciers in the world look like across a period of 10 to 15 years. This is a river that is actually happening in the summer on Greenland. Now, Greenland should be a frozen ice sheet. Now, what happens when these rivers form, they create these things called molins, which is freshwater wells that goes all the way to the bedrock, and through the bedrock goes to the ocean, completely destabilizing the ice sheet. And what does it do? It creates sea level rise, coupled with storm surges, makes quite a lot of places uninhabitable. And it's already happening. Mass human migration is happening globally due to climate change, and it's happening in Bangladesh as well, around Cox's Bazar. It's not only in the poor countries in the global south it's affected. You cannot get insurance for most parts of Florida right now for your homes. You can't do it in parts of California. This is a picture of Great Barrier Reef, what it looked like. This is how it looked like due to coral bleaching in 2019, it should be 2017, where roughly about 50% of corals died. This is the same thing that happened in US, in the Florida Keys, where the temperature of ocean went up to 37 to 40 degrees for more than 1.5 months. And that temperature, not only corals, most species in the ocean does not survive. And then we talk about tipping points. For example, the integrity of a forest system such as Amazon is dependent on particular types of cycles, that after a particular level of deforestation and drought, it completely breaks down. Same thing with the things like Antarctic, some of the Antarctic ice shelves, or Greenland or Arctic. So we are extremely close, and sometimes scientists believe that have already crossed the critical thresholds of human survival. When we talk about climate, we talk about three key injustices that climate change actually brings in. And the first critical injustice is from our generation to the next generation of our children. Because we have loaded, what we call load in the climate system. There is so much emissions and warming in the pipeline. There's nothing we can do to bring that climate change impacts onto stable conditions within our lifetime. It's simply not possible. Why? Because if you take something like ice sheets, we talk about ice sheets having something like 100 to 200 years inertia. So even if you stop emissions now, stabilize at current level, it will still melt for 100, 150 years and reverse maybe about 300 years later if we act fast. But that action is what is needed. The second injustice is actually the injustice of the global north to the global south, because most of the historical emissions have been in the developed countries in the global north. But a lot of the problems due to the climate breakdown is actually happening in the global south, who, because of poverty and lack of development, are not very positioned to do either recover from the climate crisis, the natural disasters, or build resiliency to or adaptation towards that. And you can see what the historical per capita emission for a person in Canada versus maybe a person in India. And if you plot Bangladesh, it's going to be very, very, very small. As the previous speakers also spoke about, and a lot of the emissions in Bangladesh is also maybe tied down to industry that goes out of the country, and it's not necessarily because people in Bangladesh, it's for their own development, which is very different to, say, if you take US and Canada. And that's a problem that we have to address. And the third injustice is that, all of this talk about climate adaptation, resiliency, they're only about human systems. It's not about the ecology. And if we destroy the ecology, we destroy the complete foundation of how we can live. We spoke about, we are talking about 25 to 50% of the global species going extinct. And I don't know how much of that can actually be reduced with the actions that we are talking about. Even if we talk about the Paris Agreement 1.5 degrees, the chance of survival of tropical coral reefs under 1.5 degree scenario is actually 3%. Under 2 degree scenario, it's 1%. Why is this significant? Coral reefs, 60% of global marine species spend part of their life in a coral reef. But there's a more bigger question to ask. In a world without coral reefs, are we still humans? So urgent climate action is a global need, and there are 3 parts that we talk about it, and I hope this conference covers all 3. One is rapid decarbonization. This is urgent and non-negotiable. Whether you're a rich country, whether you're a poor country, decarbonization is a global need. Everybody must come together. Second, we need to build human and natural system resilience. It's absolutely important. We can think about human system resilience. It's very difficult to think about natural system resilience. And third one is climate adaptation. And this is where the global inequities actually play. Because countries who have adequate resources will figure out ways to do at least some level of adaptation, where countries which doesn't are going to get left behind, and they're already left behind. But we must ask fundamental questions about how we live, what we make, how we make, how much we make, because without asking those fundamental questions, trying to just plug in renewable energy is not going to solve the problem. So 2 priorities. Climate action must address climate debt. Climate debt is the debt that is owed by countries who did most of the carbon emissions to the countries who are suffering from it. We talk about climate equity and climate justice. All of these are combined. They must be part of how we talk about climate. It cannot be left outside the conversation. The second one, it should not increase systemic inequities that is already present in this world. Now, I don't know how we can do this because we don't even talk about this. Not all is bad news. This year we are going to get about 440 gigawatts of renewable energy. This is one of the bright sparks, and we are expecting to go to about 1,000 gigawatts of renewable energy per year within about 3 to 4 years. So this is one good thing that is happening, and we just need to be supportive in all our individual countries. I know I'm out of time, so I'm going to take 2 more minutes, but I just want to set the context of this conversation, right? And what is important is there are 3 priorities I see that as the RMG industry we need to talk about. The first one is how do we do rapid decarbonization, reduce absolute emissions by about 50% within a decade. Can this be done? Yes. Can this be done in the way that we are trying to do this now? No. And part of this conference is to ask where are the problems, where are the blockages that is happening, that why decarbonization is not happening enough, so that we can start thinking about answers. So instead of equal targets, we talk about equitable and ambitious targets, because ambition cannot be lacked, but it has to be equitable. And we need to start talking about how we decouple what must be done, who must do it, versus who is going to pay for it. Because if you don't decouple this, we will not get to the solution. The second one is climate resiliency for infrastructure and people. If the temperatures, and especially the wet bulb temperatures, are going to rise up, how are the people going to work in the factories? If the roads are going to get flooded, the factories are going to get flooded, how is this industry going to survive? So the climate resiliency is absolutely critical. It's not yet part of the conversation. We must bring it back to the table, because manufacturing will get disrupted, supply chains will get disrupted, business will get disrupted. Third one, climate adaptation to vulnerable people. Who are the workers? Who is the lifeblood of this industry? This has to come back into the conversation, because it's absolutely important that we do it. And I'm going to finish my speech by saying where we go is up to us, and let this conference be a start, that we have meaningful, collaborative conversations and develop a collective action roadmap for the future. Thank you very much.